Welcome back, Rebels, for the second part of our deep dive into the Control Archetype. I'm really glad that you made it back for this one because we're going to be discussing the rest of the categories of control cards that we didn't cover in our first video. And the categories we'd already talked about include dice control, upgrade control, and support control, so we're not going to revisit that. Instead, we'll be tackling card control cards, resource control cards, which is a category I just added between videos, forced play cards, and I'm also going to highlight some control cards that I think are higher impact than others. And what I mean by that is that they're so special or unique that I didn't want to simply lump them into the usual category. I felt they were worth pulling out and talking about individually. So when we met last time, I had mentioned that I was building out these mill decks, right? And that's kind of what inspired me to do this whole video series. Well, nothing's changed in that regard. I'm still building stupid mill decks and trying to make them work. But now that I've satisfied my urge to do this series, something else has come to mind. And it's, can there be a true control deck in Destiny? You know, I've been wondering that, and in reviewing the cards for the last video and for this one, I think we're really close, but we're not quite there just yet. I think there needs to be more 2-die removal cards and stuff like that that works really consistently. And also maybe some better healing too, I was just thinking, because you need a lot of HP to outlast the opponent, right? Anyway, it's seeming like control only works as a variant deck for the most part, or does it? Maybe all this review will spark something in one of you to create the greatest and possibly the first real control deck of Destiny. Hey, a content creator can dream, right? Hopefully I'll inspire you. All right, so you already know what this one's about, so don't go anywhere just yet, because there's a lot of stuff to cover. So let's jump right in with our first category, card control cards. And that's like really weird to say, right? Like cards that control cards, beat cards, hating on other cards. All right. Sorry, I got a little out of hand with that one. Cards that control cards are generally discard cards or mill cards. And of course, you know, that means discarding from the hand or discarding from the deck. And these cards are really critical actions to take in a control deck as they reduce the choices that the opponent is allowed to have. Perhaps the card you pluck from their hand was going to be their very next play. Perhaps it was a crucial play later in the round, or maybe it was a card they even wanted to carry over for the next round while they were setting up their board state. And this is what I mean when I talk about mill/discard being pseudo control, and I mentioned that in the last video. Card control cards essentially say, now you have less options, have fun with that. So let's go over to the explanation screen, and I'm going to show you a few of these that I think are worth mentioning. Alright, so let's start off with an easy one. Friends in Low Places is the most basic of discard cards. It lets you look at an opponent's hand, which is wonderful by the way, and then select an event from it to discard that has a cost of 1 or 0. Now, even if you don't find a target in their hand, which would be a real shame, you become armed with the knowledge of the cards that they're holding on to. This is the most important information you could ever hope to procure in a card game. Now, you know what's up your opponent's sleeve at that point. They can't really trick you, but you might not have a way of playing around what they're going to do either. In any case, Friends in Low Places is a card that trades potentially one card from your hand, this card, for one card and also hand knowledge guaranteed. And all of that comes at 0 cost to you. But you do need to spot a yellow, so don't forget about that, kids. This card is very good, and it will be included in basically any actual control deck. And it comes up a lot in mill because it's discard and it's hand knowledge, right? And it's neutral yellow, so it just gets a crap load of play. And for the most part, you know, this is like, you put 2 of these in almost any deck, and especially control variant decks, because hitting the hand and get rid of some big 0 or 1 cost events, of which there are many in this game, is a big deal. So Pickpocket, which is over here on the right, is a little different than Friends in Low Places. This one gives you doesn't give you hand knowledge, but for 1 resource cost, it does give you card advantage. So let's give this one a read. Discard a random card from each opponent's hand draw cards equal to the number of cards you just discarded. So as I read this, Pickpocket might be an excellent card in multiplayer free-for-all, right? Each opponent is going to lose a card, and you're going to draw a card for each of those opponents that lost a card. Multiplayer launch bay deck, you've met your best friend. Anyway, Pickpocket is a neat card because even against just one player, it's a 2-card swing. They're down 1, and you get replaced with 1, but it's a new card. So it replacing itself makes your opponent wonder now, what your new card is. Maybe, maybe not, of course. But in either case, you discarded a card, and now maybe you've got a card to re-roll or to play. So, it's either a card you wanted or not. And it's really a pretty good card. It's not great. It's good. I've played it in a couple of different decks. When I'm playing multiplayer free-for-all stuff, this is definitely an include in my deck. Because again, like Friends in Low Places, it's neutral and it's yellow. So I like playing yellow every now and then. And heck, this is just a good card to put in for multiplayer. All right. Buyout is the last card I'm actually going to go over in this section in the interest of time. But also, there's really no better card to cap this section than this one right here. Let me just say this right now, in case you've missed it in my other videos. This card is broken in its current state. There was no reason ever to print this. And because stuff like this passes quality assurance, all it tells me is that FFG is either incredibly negligent or totally in love with villains and hates heroes real bad just because this is a thing. I mean, I can't even with this card. But anyway, let's go back to the show. Buyout is a card that ruins decks, lives, friendships, you name it. It allows you to simply purchase as many of an opponent's card into the discard pile as you would like with no upper cap. Remember when we talked about Confiscate not having an upper cap in the last video and how that was good? Well, imagine Confiscate for cards in someone's deck. This is it right here. And it ought to be banned because its power level is just way out of hand. It needs an errata real soon. Because, listen, I realized I just made a pun. I said its power level is way out of hand, or maybe it's way out of deck. Get it? All right. I guess I just crack myself up sometimes. All right, well, in any case, I'll be here all week. When I was making the first part of this video, I didn't think I was actually going to include this section. But after thinking about it for only a very short time, I was like, you're crazy if you don't, because this is an integral part of the game. And so the resource control card section was born, and here it is for your viewing pleasure. Okay, so why is resource control so damn important? Well, we all know players get 2 resources each at the start of a new round. And if you don't already know, more decks than you might think function almost exclusively off just those 2 resources. And of course, that deck list is shrinking by the day, however. But this concept is not to be counted out. And as an aside, I think they're shrinking by the day because Chance Cube is basically being included in just about every single deck on the planet now. But anyway, controlling an opponent's resources is really important. A really important part of the choke game, which, by the way, is an element of control that attempts to strangle an opponent's resources of all kinds, whether that's like actual in-game currency like resources or cards in hand, or by forcing continuous damage to their characters to the point where they can't really deal with it. Anything that stifles an opponent's board state is generally considered a choke play in a sense, but hitting resources directly is usually the most common form of choke. So let's take a look at some choke cards now. Alrighty, so card numero uno on this list is Fair Trade. Now, this isn't really a true choke card in a sense, but it can create a choke point. And I'll explain. This card has actually seen some spotty play over the past few months, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I believe that a rise in popularity is now in order for this card. Now that Thronkar is out there, we should all be taking a hard glance at this card like we're trying to hit on it from across a bar. Maybe pass it your number via the waitress or something. Anything to get a first date. But before you get too hot under the collar, I want you to realize that this is a resource control card with no max cap. all you need is a die showing a resource, and then you get to resolve it, swapping resource totals with your opponent. Now, that can be a really great swing play, but timing is everything with this card. And if you're looking to maximize its value, then you need to have that timing and learn that timing. This is not a card you just throw in your deck and say, I'm going to figure out how to use this thing. You really got to think about when and where this card gets played. But even if you don't have the greatest timing and you're just trying to make a very small swing play, taking one or two resources can be really good too. You got to think of it like a disrupt for X and also gaining X resources. And maybe that'll give you a better perspective on this card, okay? Use it wisely and don't just throw it in your deck because you feel like it. This can really be a good one of in a deck, maybe even a good two of. And that's pretty much how it's used right now. It's more or less as a one of in a lot of decks that I see. But Thronkar, against Thronkar, both these situations, it's good to have this card in your hand. All right. Diversion is the next card I want to talk about. Now, this one doesn't see much play, if any. And I've really tried my best to find a place for it. And it never really seems to work out. It kind of gets cut for something else every single time. But in a pure control deck or choke deck, this is an include. Right now, it's an outlier of a consideration. But if you need some quick resource control out of hand, and, but I doubt it, then this is the card for you. It's an event, and like some of the other cards in Spirit of Rebellion, it does a thing when you play it, and then it does the same thing, but better when you have a second copy in your discard pile. In this case, it disrupts one resource, or 3 if there's already another copy in your pile. And it costs 1 both times. So, you could always discard the first copy of this to reroll something and still get the better effect the second time around, mind you. And that's typically what gets done with the other cards too. But the reason I wanted to bring up Diversion specifically is that it's one of the only cards that just disrupts quickly out of hand. And the second copy is probably worth playing all the time. It's quick, and it's actually kind of efficient for the cost, at least the second time around. And I'm not saying that I'm like surprised that it didn't see play or anything. I just think it's a card that's waiting for the right deck, like a real control deck or a real choke deck. Something like that, like a resource denial choke deck. Maybe, just maybe, someone should get to work on that. Cough, Ezra. Man, I just realized I talked for like 2 minutes about a card that doesn't even see competitive play. Maybe that's why all these videos are so long, Gray. I'm sorry. No, I'm not really sorry. Just keep watching, okay? All right, so the third card you should all be very familiar with because it's Salvage Stand. This is a great resource denial card. It's a 0-cost support, so remember that it can be rented. And it reads, after one of your dice rolls a resource, you may exhaust this support to force an opponent to lose 1 resource. So you roll a resource, tap it, they lose a resource. It gives you a resource advantage, if that's even a thing. This card is really nice, and it actually gets a ton of mileage in a villain deck where at least one character has 2 resource sides on its die. This gives you a great chance to proc the stand and also choke the opponent when you run it with characters like that. Characters like Unkar, characters like Sienna Ree, things like that. The best part, of course, is running this thing alongside Imperial Inspection, which we looked at in the last video. Remove money, remove upgrades, suck it, hero players. This one's a staple in control decks right now. So keep betting on Villain Yellow because they don't seem to be slowing down anytime soon. Now, last but not least, I wanted to highlight this little guy, Ezra Bridger. Yes, folks, this tough little bastard is a pain in the butt when you roll him out right. And I'm not talking damage. He not only has a disrupt side on his die, but a special that lets you steal a resource, right? So here we go again with their whole resource advantage idea, right? Like Salvage Stand. Yes, he's only got 7 health, but he's not very good at drawing aggro, if I'm being honest. He's very innocent. People never put upgrades on him, really, and it's hard to see him as any kind of a threat, especially in a deck like Sabine Ezra, right? I mean, who's going to kill Ezra first? Or in a Hera deck, who's killing Ezra first, right? But don't let yourself be fooled, at all by that, because you got to think about low health characters for their cost and what they can do. And this guy is just straight up annoying. Take him out, or he's got the potential to be a really big nuisance. The fact that he's 10 cost for elite really just makes him that much better for players. And that could be 2 specials, 2 disrupts, a mix, something like that. And the reality is he is a neat little workhorse of a mildly sort of control-oriented character. And I know people don't look at him like that. They're looking at him for guns. But he makes money, and he takes money. And he can take money and make money at the same time, so don't count him out, because he's pretty cool. Now, I bet you didn't think I was even going to talk about Ezra, did you? Well, that's the way I do this stuff, folks, to confuse the hell out of you. No, but seriously, it's to give you a different perspective on things. You probably just look at Ezra like a tiny little gun and a resource maker, but he's got some control potential, and I hope you see that now. Anyway, the next category we're going to talk about is forced play cards. Now, there are 2 definitions to forced play, and I'm going to differentiate between them now. So the first type of forced play card is one that makes your opponent choose between either A or B. And one of those is going to happen, and then it happens, and then it's their turn again. And that's an important distinction between the second type of forced play card, which is the card that forces your opponent into fewer decisions by literally forcing them to either do something specifically or not do specific things. So like backing them into a corner where they are forced to do only a small amount of things. When we go to the next screen, this will be a bit more transparent. So let's go and do that now. Okay, let's just talk about one of the first types of forced play cards, since this one actually sees genuine play and the rest of them are basically crap. And I'll explain why that is too. And the card I want to talk about is Abandon All Hope. When you play this card, your opponent is now forced into the decision of either losing all of their resources or losing their entire hand. 2 very solid control-oriented options. And you, as the player who's playing this card, might be happy with either outcome in a lot of cases, right? If they lose their resources, can they then afford to play the cards that they kept? And if they lose their hand, well, then what are they going to spend their money on? It's the hardest choice of all the forced play cards in Destiny, and there are many, and here they are. One of them is Let the Wookiee Win. You're forcing your opponent to choose to either deal one of their exhausted characters 2 damage, or choose and remove 2 of their dice. Most of the time they just take the damage because losing 2 dice is really terrible. Create Dragon Howl, spot a blue character, choose an opponent's die. They either remove that die or you mill 2 cards off their deck. Again, not a huge impact. And then Local Patrol is sort of similar. Force an opponent to choose to either lose 1 resource or discard the top 2 cards of their deck. Again, not a whole lot of impact, because when you're asking a player to choose between what is in front of them, their resources, 1 die or 2 die, and between that and an unknown, like you're going to lose 2 cards off your deck, the choice is really easy. They're going to say, okay, I'll just, lose the cards off my deck, because those cards aren't in play. They're not my concern right now, unless they've peeked at those cards in some way. Like maybe you've used this card after they Starship Graveyard and they know, man, I put this card on top of my deck. I really do want to get it. Maybe I'll lose a resource and I'll figure out, how to do that later. Now, the other problem with these cards, and then the fact that they're generally pretty weak, with the exception of Abandon All Hope, is the wording with these cards. And it's that an opponent can choose an option even if they don't actually meet the criteria for it. So if you played Local Patrol, the card on the right here, and your opponent has no resources and they have 15 cards in their deck, they can literally choose to lose a resource, because that's one of the choices. They don't have to spend a resource. They can actually choose to lose any amount of resources when they have 0. You could make them lose 10 resources when they have 0 resources. And I know that sounds stupid, so email FFG if you think that's stupid too, and tell them that, and have them rewrite the ruling on these, because Abandon All Hope gets around this sort of limitation, though, that we're talking about with good timing. Generally speaking, to get the most impact out of this card, it's the first thing you play in your round. Turn 1, maximize the opponent's losses. They've got their 2 resources plus any carryover, 5 fresh cards in your hand, And that is why it's really the only one of this entire bunch that sees any play. Because the timing allows you to basically say, you are going to be screwed the rest of your turn. Pick which door you would like to walk through and, have at it. So now we're going to talk about that second category of forced play cards. And these are the option limiting ones rather than the option presenting ones like the last batch. This will make a lot more sense when you look at a card like Coercion. This card, when played, allows you to look at an opponent's hand, choose an event, and tell them that they have to play that card as their next action. It mixes things up some kind of awful, and I tell you what, Coercion is nasty when played at the right time. And of course, hand knowledge is good 100% of the time. Now, your opponent can certainly pass for the entire round if they don't want to play that card, or they can wait for an opportunity in which playing that card is more advantageous to them. And you can spend the rest of the time playing around that card if you need to do that and just go about your business. But no matter what they are locked into playing, they're locked into playing that card as their next action, at least until the round ends, I would think. But I don't think there's an official ruling on that just yet. But to me, that seems the most logical. But heck, don't take my word for it, because logical to me would be this card costing as much as this card. And it doesn't. So FFG owns and operates a different sort of logical machine than I do. Anyway, the second and only other forced play card that I'm going to review here is Running Interference. People either love this card or they hate it, okay? And maybe that duality doesn't exactly exist, but if you've ever seen this card in action or you have a really good imagination, you can tell that this card is a bit of a beast. It allows you, before an action is taken, to exhaust it and lock that action out for the opponent's next turn. So if you're running two of these on the table at once with some ambush plays, suddenly your opponent can't do two of the different pre-assigned actions next turn. Running Interference essentially forces your opponent into a smaller corner than they're already in. The most common plays in Destiny, mind you, are playing a card out of your hand and activating a character or support. And two copies of this at the table at the same time with one ambush action can actually lock both of these things. So this has actually been referred to as a soft lock for a player turn, and not a hard lock because there's ways to get around it. Because in a lot of cases, the opponent could simply claim, but there actually are some ways, although very few and far between, to create more of a hard lock. Your opponent can get out of this a lot of ways. Like if they had dice on a table, they could discard a reroll or resolve one of those dice. And I'm talking about the soft lock here. So it's not entirely impossible to break it, but in certain instances, like right when the round begins, it has the potential to create a very negative play experience for your opponent. But that all said, this card is super strong. And if you don't see that, then you got to rewind this, listen again, read the card real well, put it in your deck, go on TTS or your local store, and find or play an experienced, as experienced as you can be a couple of weeks in, Sabine player, and experience it for yourself. And you're going to see that this card it's quite a control-y card. And I think if a hero control variant deck or full control deck comes out, you're going to see this card played without a doubt because of what it does. So between these two videos now, we've covered 6 categories so far, and these pretty much encompass all the control cards in the entire game. So I think this gives us a pretty good idea of the sorts of iterations on a theme that we can expect going forward. But before I wrap up this entire idea, I want to go over just a few more cards and talk briefly also about the Guardian keyword too. And the cards I want to show you next are a few that get a special place in my brain, I guess, because of how powerful they could potentially be. And now none of these cards couldn't be talked about in another section, but I wanted to highlight them here because they're actually all pretty good. Alright, so these are all my highlights of the control archetype, and the first card I want to bring up is a die control card, and that's Dark Presence. Again, no reason that I couldn't have talked about it in the last video. Heck, I mean, I talked about Imperial Inspection and Salvage Stand already in their respective sections, so to speak. And I didn't forget about it. I just wanted to pull it out and highlight it this way because I believe this is a great die control card. And this is another great reason why also Detention Center is really good from the last video. You know, they're permanent die removal that can happen at an instant. But this one is a zero cost support. It's amazing, of course. And it's another card advantage card in a sense, like Honor Guard. It's a support that removes a die. And, you know, again, that is a great thing to have because the possibility for this card to be controlling and stifling is there because it's reusable. It sticks around and it's there when you need it. Yeah, you have to roll a discard, but there's more than enough discard sides to go around a blue villain. And it doesn't actually have to be a blue die. It could be a yellow die, right? It could be Mr. Interrogation Droid's die. So a lot of flex with this card. And again, I love the fact that it's permanent die removal on the table. Now, of course, you know, it can be hit with Rend, which is new. But are you going to hit Rend with this? I don't know. Are you going to hit this with Rend? I don't know. I'm not really sure. I haven't really seen it used in that fashion. Mostly people are hunting for Imperial Inspection. So I think Dark Presence gets under the radar sometimes. But I think it's a really good card. The second card worth highlighting is Local Garrison. Now, I'm not sure exactly why this card doesn't see like a ton of play. But my guess is, I don't know, red villain not having a whole ton of resources. I'm not sure because it has access to Prepare for War now as well as logistics. So it should be seeing more play with Thrawn in the meta now too. But it remains to be seen if this is like a pure choke card and if it's going to make tier 1 deck lists with in Thrawn car in general. Control variant, you know, versus the vehicle variant. I don't know. But the reason that it is important to talk about is, again, it's a permanent, right? It's support. Local Garrison changes a fundamental rule about the game. So it's more than just any other resource control card like I did early in the video. It literally overrides the upkeep rules that gives an opponent 2 resources every turn. No, now they only get 1. What? That is like crazy. But wait, there's more. It says each opponent. Wow, everybody at the table in a free-for-all? That's insane. But wait, there's more. It's a support. And Gray talked about how support removal in this game is friggin' awful. Is that all you had to say? Yeah, no, that's pretty much all I had to say about it. So if you're looking to squeeze the most out of a 3-resource support over the course of a game, Local Garrison could be your ticket in a control choke kind of deck. Just be careful about taking it to a multiplayer game. You may not be able to talk your way out of the incoming aggressive negotiations. All right, folks, we're coming down to it. Here's the last card we're going to be talking about in this video series. For now. I mean, who knows? There might be a third part in the future, right? As we get more really awesome control cards and they're worth highlighting. And I want you to take a guess on which card it is. I'll give you like 5 seconds to think about it. All right. Time's up. The card is Prized Possession. Now, as I've said before, I could have thrown a card like this into the die control section. We could have moved past it very quickly. But this is a very special card. And if you notice, it's actually unique, meaning you can only have one in play. Good thing, too, because this isn't your average die control card. Let me read this out to you, okay? It's a 4-cost yellow upgrade. After you play this upgrade, you may remove an opponent's character die, which means it has to be in the pool at the time of play, and place it here, meaning on top of the card. It is not rolled by any character and does not return to its character unless this upgrade leaves play. This thing is incredibly controlling, and yellow villain control decks absolutely love this card. It is seeing a ton of play in the Thrawn card deck right now, and for good reason. Just imagine you lock out a Darth Vader die or a Sabine Wren die for the majority of the game. That's just bonkers. Now, the stipulation, as I mentioned before, has to be in the pool, so there is some timing to this play. But it's not the sort of timing that you need to be super particular about. The opponent rolls in, you play a prized possession, and you lock out the die. Lockdown mode has now activated. Prized possession is such a good card, and even at 4 cost, it's still powerful for what it does. I mean, would you pay 1 resource to move a die each round for 4 rounds? Of course you would. I would, and in fact, I probably do already. So it's perfectly costed for its power level. It's very, very game changing, and the earlier you get it out, the better, because really you're going to get more mileage out of it. You're getting more value out of it this way. This is a quintessential control card in Destiny for villain, and should be looked upon by players with both respect as well as fear. So I said that I was done showing you specific cards, and that's completely true. So I'm just going to throw this guy up here because it's related to our discussion and it fills the screen a little bit. And I want to help you recognize that the Guardian keyword is very critical to control as well in a lot of ways. And I don't think I need to go into much detail on this one, because even as a beginner player, you know what it does, right? It removes a damage die from your opponent's pool. You take the damage on the Guardian character. It's simple, it's effective, it's die control, and it's also damage control. And that's what's important, right? It's 2 things in one. How can you beat that? That's what Watto would say. I mean, sure, your Guardian is eventually going to die, but I mean, that's his point, right? They're protecting your big character from death, spreading out damage in the meantime, and extending the life of the game. Guardian is something that control decks might look towards as a backup plan to strong activated abilities. Just keep in mind when making your casual controller mill decks, okay, if you've got some extra room in the points, maybe a Guardian character might help you out a little bit, because he's going to give you die removal, right? Guardian is almost like an honor guard, right? It's on-demand die removal. You're still going to eat the damage. You can eat it into shields. It's pretty dang good for what it does, and it's been in the game since the beginning, and you see it a lot. You saw it a lot early on in Hero Mill decks for that very reason. Rebel Troopers with Padme and things like that, really protecting her so she can get her job done, helping control the board state quite a bit. So Guardian is really good at that. Don't ignore it. Don't neglect it. There are more and more Guardian characters coming out in every set, and they're always worth taking a look at. So there you have it, Rebels, a full review of the concepts within the control archetype. Were you keeping notes this time at least? No, I expected as much. So here they are right here once again on the right side of the screen. First, we discussed card control cards in the video, and these are cards that control the hand and deck by discarding cards from both. There are a growing number of these cards in each set, and we took a look at only a small sampling of them today, but there are quite a few. And if you're looking to build a mill/control variant deck, then you're going to want to familiarize yourself with the cards in this category, as you're going to be focusing primarily on using these cards for die control, and then also these cards for hand control, and those things go together very, very well in Destiny. The second thing we took a look at was a couple of resource control cards. Fair Trade being a sneaky play when used at the right time. It lets, it appears sometimes as though you're letting your opponent run away with the board, and then you can come back and take their cash. So there's a lot of time into that one, and it takes practice to get good at it. Diversion, on the other hand, much more straightforward. Doesn't see a lot of play, but it can be really good in a pinch, and I think that it's just a start of some really good resource to now cards. Like we talked about Local Garrison too, just a few minutes ago as well, is definitely a resource control card of a special breed. The third set of cards we looked at were the forced play cards, the ones that come in 2 flavors, right? It's the either or choice cards for your opponent, and also the option limiting cards. Both have their uses, and I took some time to talk about the really impactful ones today. Abandon All Hope, it's an A+ card. Coercion, Running Interference, all very interesting additions to the game from Empire at War. These sorts of cards really could benefit from sort of their own deep dive because of how complex or interesting the timing on these plays can be. And this is like very contrasted to when we talked about prized possession, right? Not a lot to that. See the die in the pool, you want to get rid of it. Prized possession. Coercion, much, much different card in terms of playing, how to play it in terms of timing. Running Interference, same sort of thing, different mindset. But all these cards together, they are really control cards. And it's hard to find examples of how those cards are really played, and they're very difficult to describe. So if you need information on coercion, running interference, things like that right now, I'd say find the top players at your store and ask them how to best utilize these cards, or watch some online games that you might see streamed on different YouTube videos and channels and see how they're used during the games so that you can get an idea of sort of the timings that need to be used to play these cards. Lastly, we took a look at some cards that were my personal highlights that I felt really stand out in the control archetype. All these cards I feel, were good and they were worth talking about despite belonging to other categories that we've already talked about either in this video or the previous one. But they really are cut above the rest and were worth going over individually so that you're aware of them and their potential impact. Again, there were only a few, but they were all really great cards. So now that we're done taking a look at this, what do you do now that you're armed with all this knowledge? Well, you get out there. You start making control decks, I would think, or maybe not. Maybe you just stopped by here and you spent the last hour plus because you like hearing my voice. That's cool too. It's kind of creepy, but that's cool. Whatever your motivation is here, what I want you to take away from this is control is a viable archetype that needs some work, but it's getting better. Every set, all the time. It's not as polished as aggro, certainly isn't. But control variant type decks definitely hold their own. There's a lot of these cards worth just splashing into other types of decks. And putting together several different categories of these cards in your control variant can be a really great way to mix it up. Keep your opponent wondering what your angle is, what else are you trying to do in addition to your win condition. Give it a shot. It's worth it, and it will provide you also with a different perspective on this game. Guaranteed. All right, I'll admit it. I'm glad to be done with these two videos. They were a lot of work to prepare, and I know I'm not going to get a lot of views out of these, but I don't really care about that. What was important was getting this information right. And that took a lot of time because I don't play a lot of these cards myself. I always look at them though when I'm thinking about control elements for various decks, especially those hero mill decks that I've been working on. And obviously, if you look through the videos and you check out a lot of the cards, most of them are villain cards. So I don't even have access to these cards when I'm making, these kinds of my hero mill decks. So to give you an update on that though, because it has been a few days, there were two decks specifically that I was working on. The first one was a Lando and Mon Mothma mill deck that had some vehicles, U-Wings and Millennium Falcons for discard, U-Wings for shields. And I really put this thing to the ringer, and I didn't feel, after modifying it about maybe 24 times, that it really had the legs to take out aggro decks consistently. The second deck that I've been working on is Riken Padme and Jedi Instructor, and that's also a hero mill deck, but it generates a lot more shields than Lando Mon Mothma, and it mills like a bad habit, and it's much better. It deals with aggro quite nicely, and it really controls dice very well. It's a real winner, and my record is a lot better than 50% right now with it. I'm really happy with it. I'm going to continue tweaking it. Also, a really big shout out to Tybrid on Knights of Ren Discord, who I believe is also a fellow hero player. He's put in a lot of work on that exact deck himself. And yesterday when he sent me his deck list, I combined my idea with his idea, and I was able to eke out a little bit more success with it. So I'm really content with it. And I think that's at the Aussie Nationals, which just happened from Friday night into Saturday. It's now Saturday at about 11 o'clock at night right now when I'm recording this. The Riken Mill deck, I believe, placed 13th. So, and it wasn't the same deck list. It wasn't as refined as mine or Tybrid's. So I think that Hero Mill might have a spot, but that remains to be seen. Anyway, so you're wondering what's next, right? Okay, well, I promised you a video on the Mulligan stats, and that is still in the works. I've got a script written up for it, but I need to refine it a little bit more. We also just got some news on the 4th Destiny set, Legacies, and I feel that I really might discuss that a bit, less as spoilers and more how it fits in with everything that we already know. I think the new indirect damage mechanic might very well bring something neat to the game, so I might, it's most likely I'm going to do a video on that next. So you can expect that sometime midweek. And if you catch this one before Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you can hear me as a guest on the new I Rebel podcast, which is hosted by Jedi Geek Girl. So Listen to her show. It's fantastic. She's had a couple episodes only already, but it's good. She was a former host in the Chance Cube, and I love her stuff. All right, folks, stay sane, roll some dice, play some cards, and until next time, may the force be with you.